Bubbler, this is your last shot. I've got the koozie. All I'm saying is, if you're not with me when I have 30 subscribers, don't come crawling when I have 35. It's just not gonna work. Alright, how's it going everybody? I'm back with another video, and today we're talking low light gyms, badly lit gyms. How do you edit photos in these types of low light situations where you still have to have a fast shutter speed, you still have to capture the action when the gym is not very well lit. So if you're like me and you're shooting high school gyms or sometimes even college gyms, the lighting can be less than ideal for photographers. It can look bright, you know, just looking at it, but once you start looking through that viewfinder, it can be a totally different scenario. There can be a lot of weird overcast, weird shadows, and so that's what I'm here for, to help you guys figure out kind of how to edit in low light or badly lit gyms. And no, that doesn't mean turning the flash on. Don't do that. Do not use flash photography for high school sports. So first, let's dive into Lightroom. Let's take a look at some raw images I shot at Buena Vista just this last Saturday. And this was one of the more dimly lit gyms that I have photographed. And I still like to keep a high shutter speed even when it's pretty low light, just so that I know that there won't be any motion blur. And shooting with an R5, I know that with a dynamic range, just a little exposure bump will go a long way. So if we just bump that exposure up maybe a full stop, you can see it looks much better. You can't really see any detail loss. You can see a little bit of noise just because I was at 2000 ISO, but not really when you're just looking at the image. So my first tip is to get rid of all the kind of junk colors, the weird colors that kind of make the image just look a little bit messy. And usually that starts with the rafters. A lot of times the rafters have like a weird green, yellow overcast, and I hate the way they look because I feel like it makes it look kind of just a little messy. So what I like to do is it's usually either yellow or green up here. Now the problem I ran into with this was that their jerseys were yellow, so I kind of had to work around that. But if we just go down here to the HSL and just desaturate that yellow all the way, you can see that that is almost all completely gone there, and it looks just a lot better. But now his shirt and his jersey just kind of look rough. So I can tell the parts that are still saturated are the oranges because the yellows are all the way desaturated. So we can just bring these up a little bit, and then what we can do is move the orange hue over a little bit more towards yellow, and then saturate it to kind of make up for the yellow that we lost by desaturating and getting rid of all this mess in the rafters. Now, another thing is turning down the temperature will help as well. Now, with white balance in low lit gyms, you have to be really careful. It can get out of hand very quickly, and when your eyes are just staring at you making subtle changes, a lot of times when you go back and look at those images, you'll see where you messed up. So be very careful about white balance. You don't want it too cold, you don't want it too warm. So I like to bring the temperature down just a little bit until I can just see the blue, and then I'll bring this a little bit more towards green so that it somewhat looks still like the actual color, but just way subdued. Another thing that I like to do is bring out the color of the jerseys of the two teams that are playing, so your eyes are drawn to the action and not somebody wearing a bright purple shirt out in the crowd when the teams that are playing are red and blue. Like I said, it was a little difficult with this team because they were wearing yellow jerseys, but I think I hit a sweet spot in there with the orange slider, and then this other team was blue. You can't really see it in this photo, but I like to bring up the saturation and the brightness of those blues so that they really pop when the image gets processed. So here's a look at my first edit. As you can see, I really did have a rough time getting those yellows and oranges kind of how I wanted them. So this is the final edit that I ended up with. And you can see massive change, just absolutely took out all that gross yellow green in there. You can still kind of see it, but it's a lot better. Another thing that I like to desaturate a lot and kind of just subdue is the gym floor. A lot of times if it's kind of a bright wood, I like to just desaturate it. Keep it bright, but just desaturate it so that it doesn't overtake the photo. So if you have your colors dialed in, you have them how you want them, we can talk about contrast. Contrast is one of the most fun things for me to edit in any photo. I just like bringing it to life with those deep shadows and bright highlights, and it's just really fun to mess with, especially seeing how you can transform a pretty dimly lit photo and really bring out the contrast from that raw file to the finished product. So for example, with this shot, I have the lights in it. I love shots where you get those bright lights in it because I really feel like you can get some deep contrast in them. And typically, most of my work is done in the tone curve. I do a little work up here with these sliders, just not as much. Most of my work is done in the tone curve. So first, I really like to bring my highlights up. I like to bring them up quite a bit when there's obviously the lights in the photos, and given that this gym was pretty dimly lit, bringing those highlights up is always a good thing. So I like to keep the midtones about right where the highlights land them. Sometimes I bring them a little bit higher, but it just kind of depends. And then I like to go right about here and drop the shadows back to that original line. So just right about where it was, and then I like to get these really dark spots and just deepen them just a bit. So it kind of creates a little wonky S-curve, but still a pretty broad, pretty deep S-curve to really get that contrast. As you can see here, if we check out the before and afters, it's pretty dark, but even if we bump the exposure up, you really get some nice contrast here in this shot. And I think it turned out really well, even with the dim lighting. The last thing I want to talk about is skin tones. Skin tones can be really tricky. They can get messy really quick, and dialing them in with sports photos is just as difficult as doing them in any other type of photography. So this, I'm talking about your yellow, orange, and red HSL sliders. These can get out of hand really quickly. Most of the time you'll be working in the orange, but sometimes they can seep a little into yellow or red. And as you can see here, just by doing this, you can really tell how quickly that can get out of hand. So what I like to do is typically I desaturate them quite a bit. Now obviously again, these yellow orangish jerseys made it a little difficult, but typically I like to just kind of desaturate them so that any subtle flaw is not noticed as much. Now this brings down the jersey color quite a bit, which we talked about wanting those jerseys to pop, which is why I kept those basically as is, but for the most part I like to just desaturate them a little bit, maybe brighten them up, but kind of make them a more subtle part of the photo and make their maybe indiscrepancies just a little bit less noticeable. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you found this valuable. Sports photos and badly lit gyms can somewhat be difficult to conquer, but I hope these tips kind of help you develop a workflow where you can get good looking photos even in a badly lit gym.